So Azure Sentinel is not a new product. We've launched it about, I would say about 2 years now since. Of course, before that, it was also in public preview, private preview, and the product has really come a long way if you've been monitoring it over the past 2 years. So essentially what Azure Sentinel is meant to do is to help you gain visibility over your security data. And security data, as you know, could reside not just in the cloud, but also mostly on-prem. It's scattered all over. It's coming from various different sources, from your endpoints to your networks, etc. And it's not a new solution, right? Logging has been an issue for us in security for the longest time. I think the only difference recently is that now with cloud on our side, we actually can rethink the way in which we collect our data, but also more importantly, how we process our data. And actually some interesting things that just landed a couple of days ago. Microsoft SOC ourselves. We actually have a few SOC teams within Microsoft, and most of them are actually starting to move towards the use of Azure Sentinel. So bit by bit, they are migrating off traditional SIEMs. The big reason why was simply because we could not scale. So today we're ingesting for just that one SOC that monitors our corporate network, they're ingesting about 19 billion events per day. And that's really just a subset. So only a subset of our data goes to the SIM. There's a huge data lake behind that, where it's the first landing point, where we're really just grabbing all the logs we can that's relevant to do triaging, to do additional enrichment wherever necessary. But you can just imagine the scale of such an operation. In the past, when we were using something traditional and legacy, was very, very painful for us. And we were really hitting scale issues. So that blog post is actually out already, and I'll share it in the chat window later on. It's quite an interesting story to see the journey, just Microsoft ourselves, how we actually are using our own product as well. So just very quickly, I wanted to mention what are some of the key features for Azure Sentinel. So as you know, in the older days, SIEM really was more around let's grab all that data, let's build some kind of static roles, let's focus a lot on report generation, showing visibility, that lovely alert funnel that we are so used to having, right? How many events per day of raw events led to maybe X number of incidents, for example. But today, I think we're really pushing the envelope here to rethink what exactly we can do there. And there's going to be a huge focus on automation response, as well as looking at operational efficiency, right? So the first thing you'll notice is we've actually completely removed the need for you as the customer to manage the infrastructure of your SIM. So there's no need to, for example, decide, oh no, I'm running out of storage. Do I need to add another cluster here? How is my sharding being done, etc.? All of those concerns, which really do add up, they're actually taken out for you because we're a cloud native solution. It's a SaaS-based model. Just think of it that way. Your job is just to think of what do I want to collect? How can I bring that in? And what insights do I want to generate from it? So right up from the left, you'll see we'll be collecting data, of course. There will be data coming from first party, so your Microsoft, your Azure sources, of course, those come in very easily. But of course, third-party data connectors are going to constitute probably the bulk of your ingest. So it could be data coming from anywhere, like we mentioned earlier. It could be firewalls, it could be routers, switches, whichever. Now, once you've brought that data in, of course, it gets stored and saved. So you can do your searches on it. Immediately, you're going to get a lot of visibility, things in such as security events on your servers that you've never seen before, right? Depending on how much you decide to bring in, that's going to give you that additional visibility that you probably did not have prior to consolidating all your information inside Azure Sentinel. So from there, you can, of course, choose to say, I want to build certain dashboards, I want to build certain views to help streamline my monitoring as well. The next thing you can also bring in is actually intelligence. So of course, Azure Sentinel itself has components and elements of the intelligence within it as well. But you can also bring in external feeds to actually augment that search, give you additional context, right? So an IP doesn't just look like an IP. At least you can have some information around which other vendors out there, or from VirusTotal even, what else have I seen related to this IP? Give me some who is information, whichever. Now, the main interesting areas are around analytics and hunting. So there's a lot of inbuilt capabilities within the Azure Sentinel platform to really help you get to where you want to be. So regardless of where you are in your SIM journey or how comfortable you are with security analytics and the idea of doing even hunting as well, we try to make it as simple and as user friendly as possible. So just starting out with templates that we enable within the portal, it gets you to a fairly good starting point to start considering what else can I do? How else can I customize this to really make this my experience and my SIM? The last two sections are around investigation and response. So whenever an incident does happen, and we want to try and keep that incident funnel and incident queue as high fidelity as possible. So high confidence, low number of alerts. We don't want you to be overwhelmed and bombarded with 2,000 alerts every day. That is not the intention. We want to really give you a queue that your analyst can pick up only when necessary. Things where you require additional information from the users because the user has been downloading certain files, for example. You want to do an investigation at some point, but maybe right now it doesn't make sense to assign this to an analyst as of the current state. So you can actually use automation to help you augment that piece, get a response from the user, attach the user's response into the case, include some kind of a conditional flow that says if the response is A, then I'm going to close the ticket because it's fine. It's a false positive. If the response is B, then yes, immediately escalate because the user said, I did not use a Tor browser. What is a Tor browser, right? For example. So thinking of all these ideas to really help fuse together, I would say the technology layer as well as your SOC processes to help ultimately drive better and more efficient in-house security understanding is the end goal that we want to have. And of course, we have Quantum today here on the call for a very big and very important reason. Sentinel is just, like we mentioned, a technology layer, right? We're here to serve your needs to help realize what you want to achieve. But I think a lot of the benefit or a lot of the advantage can only be extracted out when you do have a good partner to get on this journey together with you because technology is just technology. I always say an SIEM is really a Swiss Army knife. If you want to pull up a pair of scissors or something to try and open a beer bottle, I mean, it could work. It's just not the most intuitive process. You're going to find it painful. The tool is going to find it painful. So, you do need to, I mean, you don't need to have a consultant to tell you don't use a pair of scissors to open a beer bottle. That's a bad analogy, but really having a partner to help you along the way, it makes a huge amount of difference. We've seen it ourselves as well when we are talking to our customers. We come in more from a technology angle, where Quantum comes in from is really telling you the best practices in terms of how use cases should be developed, how you should actually structure and utilize the technology to fit your specific needs, because every enterprise is very different. So with that, I'm probably going to pass the time on to Chris to take you through the portal as well.
Thanks, Sharon. And your analogy tells me where your mind is right now at 11:15.
I know, I'm not sure what time zone I'm in.
Let me share our screen real quick. So I appreciate the introduction. And if you could remember that chart that Sharon showed with that had data, visibility, intelligence, analytics, hunting, we're going to kind of walk through that, actually using the Sentinel platform to kind of show you that full experience of running that that next generation SOC. Quick background. This is a Quantum Security. We're located in Singapore. Quantum.security. We do have customers across all Southeast Asia, the United States, and Europe. We are a Singapore company that we fit actually under the Temasek umbrella. The product that we're talking today is around XDR plus SOC, which is extended detection and response plus SOC. And like Sharon talked about, we 100% leverage the Sentinel platform. So before we jump into Sentinel, I did want to talk about the MITRE attack framework, because I think it's important to understand there's a strategic difference between what Sentinel and Quantum can do together than you may be aware of. I mean, a lot of organizations are focused around compliance, ISO compliance or PDPA or you name it. And compliance is a way to make sure that your processes and security controls are in place, right? And you know, and that they're functioning. The MITRE ATT&CK framework, if you've not heard of MITRE ATT&CK, MITRE ATT&CK is a global framework with the top contributors in the world from many, many organizations to include Microsoft and Palo and Trend, and I could just go through all the different organizations that contribute to MITRE, right? And this is a approach that's different than compliance, where it's focused on the actual threat actors' activities. So threat actors use tactics, techniques, and procedures to go after your data. And those are called TTPs, if you've heard of that term. And so Sentinel, Microsoft, has embraced MITRE ATT&CK in the Sentinel platform. Quantum Security has embraced MITRE ATT&CK framework into our strategy and how we execute what we do for a living. So it's really important to kind of align yourself to MITRE to understand these are the activities that threat actors are doing. And these activities, across these activities, this is what's called the cyber kill chain, by the way, where it goes from reconnaissance all the way into exfilling data. These are the steps that threat actors do. And so me, as a owner of that data, or you, I know across the MITRE ATT&CK framework how covered I am to be able to do detection and how protected I am being able to defend myself against these kinds of TTPs. So it's a really important kind of model. And so I'll walk through one more thing with Microsoft and Quantum Security working together, because like Sharon's analogy, talking about using scissors to open up a beer can, you know, there's ways in which you can go about how to build your SOC with these things called rules. And Microsoft out of the box does a great job of developing rules. This is how many rules that Sentinel has out of the box. And with Microsoft now embracing it internally, I imagine this rule curve is going to go really high. So I'm super excited about that. And then Quantum Security brings these levels of rules into the platform. If you're familiar with MITRE, we also have a MITRE ATT&CK, which we can share this to you in the link, but a MITRE ATT&CK overlay of the Sentinel baseline rule library as well as the Quantum Security rule library. So if you were to click on this, you're able to see in the blue shades the things that the Sentinel rule library covers by default. And if you were to click on this, you'd see the things that Quantum Security covers by default. And we're actually working on a version that meshes the both of them. So you know, we didn't need to cover things that Microsoft Sentinel already covers, right? And so I wanted to kind of give you this background because it'll be important as I walk you through the demo. First off, let's talk about visibility. And so Microsoft Sentinel is a platform that sits on the Azure stack. And Azure has an analytics plane, which is quite powerful. And we roll all of our data up into the Azure analytics plane. So we kind of start with the end in mind. What do customers want to see? What level of information do their stakeholders want to have? Whether you do have a SOC, whether you just have an IT team that is responsible for security, or you have CISOs or CEOs that are wanting to get visibility into your risk, right? And so we like to start out with that dashboard view and figure out what's the data that we need to present to you. And the analytics plane within the Azure stack is quite powerful. And you know, you have things from security metrics. We can roll up top vulnerabilities, how you're doing across compliance, whether it's PCI, ISO, you name it, and put all the details of information that you have across your data view into various dashboards, whether it's, like I said, IT, software developer, CEO, right? And in addition, we also have the ability to not just bring security data in, but you may want to bring in data from New Relic or any of your performance management products and bring them into a single view. So when you think about cybersecurity, think about some of the outcomes first. That's where we like to start, right? Is what are the outcomes from a visibility perspective that you want to have, okay? And then again, this is done within the Azure Analytics plane. Then when we're in Sentinel itself, which is we're in our demo environment of Sentinel, which actually has live data in it, I'll go through the steps that Sharon showed earlier with her chart to kind of talk about data first. We've got to connect data, right? And so data connections is extremely easy. And because of Microsoft's market power, the third-party security vendors are doing a ton of data connections into the Microsoft stack. And so by default, you see just all the different logos in here, whether, it's either other cloud environments like Amazon Web Services, or, of course, all the Microsoft ecosystem products are fully connected, Cisco, Checkpoint, you kind of, you name it. CrowdStrike just is in preview right now. So other EDR vendors that are out there. And if a vendor isn't supported, then we can bring in common event format, SAF files, or all the way into syslogs. So there's really nothing that we can't import on the data side. And even if a old application or mainframe computer does not support syslog outputs, Quantum Security has the ability to have parsers and interface with those, whatever log outputs they do, and ensure that it gets into Sentinel. So there's no reason why Sentinel is not able to get the data into your environment. While I'm in here, I'm going to bring up the solutions plane, because this is a new section as it relates to third-party vendors as well. And Sharon, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. So for example, we're really trying to push the envelope here in terms of what exactly is security monitoring. So it's not just, in the past we talked a lot about perimeter monitoring. It's always about forwarding firewall logs, etc. in. So if we click into this, for example, under solutions, this was fairly new, announced recently during RSA. We're actually going into more thematic understanding or thematic analytics of data. So here, for example, there's SAP. And if we click on create, what actually happens is there's a pre-built content pack for SAP monitoring. And this has been quite a buzzword for the past couple of months since we've launched this. A lot of customers are starting to realize, my goodness, there is a security concern around my SAP deployment. And SAP, if you know, in itself, it's quite a beast. It has about 16 subsets or 16 log sources within it. And so we're pulling in things like your security audit logs, your Java logs, etc. And if we just slowly navigate to data connectors, for example, or maybe workbooks actually. So data connectors is the boring bit. That's how we pull the data in. But in this content pack, for example, we'll actually give you a pre-built SAP monitoring workbook. You can look at user activities, who's modifying transaction codes in SAP, highly privileged users, etc. All of that context is actually brought in as well for you. So under the tab of analytics, that's where all those special rules related to SAP security are going to be implemented into your Sentinel instance for you. So things like looking at your HANA-DB, looking at brute force attacks, but things that are very specific to SAP as well. Fraudulent transaction codes being used, sensitive transaction codes being used, system changes, etc. All of these things that in the past we kind of never saw as being under security team's jurisdiction. Increasingly, as you know, it's becoming more and more our security team's concern. So that's why we do see a need to help augment that. We do want to have that kind of a combined capability with SAP contextual understanding, as well as understanding from a security perspective, right? How can I make sure that my privileged users, my admin users on the IT side, as well as on the SAP side, are being sufficiently monitored as well? So these content packs are really meant to help you get there. And then from there, you can modify it as well.
Yeah, and this is really important, because as a security individual, you spend a lot of time doing plumbing work, not really doing the hardcore SOC analyst work, where you're spending your energy making sure that the data that you connected is not getting broken because the vendor changed something, right? And so it's not very programmatic. It usually has a lot of manual connections and some sort of parsers that are kind of built in between. And with Microsoft's power and with these top of the industry vendors building these packs and these connectors into the stack, you kind of get rid of that plumbing work. That's the responsibility of Microsoft and the vendor to kind of do that. And it's kind of deburdens the security team from keeping the data running properly, right? Having been a customer of Splunk and Sumo Logic and QRadar and all the other scenarios out there, I can tell you half my security team's energy was fixing plumbing from vendors making changes to stuff. And so it's really nice to see this programmatic view. Okay, so we talked about data connectors and a little bit on the visibility side. We'll touch in on the threat intel just to kind of give you kind of a quick preview on that. As Sharon talked about, third-party threat feeds are really important, whether you're getting who is information or IT, IP trust information and whatnot. And you can see all the different custom sources that are here to see the indicators. And then from here, you're able to go deeper and kind of understand where your indicators are coming from, what source are being hit, and whatnot. So the idea of having intelligence on the data within your firewalls, if you will, right? The stuff that you're collecting within your applications, but also meshing that intelligence with things that are happening outside your firewall, in the internet, if you will. And kind of meshing those two is very, very powerful. So let's go into the life as a SOC and how to kind of build that next generation SOC now. So the things that we have to do, again, we're switching back to the modern attack framework, but the first thing we have to do is really understand what our threat hunting rules are. So what are the things across the modern attack framework? And if you see this bar here, this is the kill chain that's embedded right into the Sentinel platform. These are the tactics that are MITRE tactics. And these are the various threat hunting rules that we have. Again, we have over 10,000 rules that we can, implement into your environment depending on the scope. But these are rules like, here's an AWS IAM rule. And then there's DNS rules. There's, you can have the SharePoint rules. I mean, kind of everything is built into this rule library. We, as security practitioners, are able to map this across the MITRE attack framework, because if this is mapped across the MITRE attack framework, you're able to see where you may have gaps. So again, you may want to see visually using this tool where you have gaps, but within the framework, you can also see it here, because most people focused at the very beginning. Most organizations spend money with the typical cybersecurity technology vendors protecting the perimeter, right? But once they get through those first levels of the kill chain and they start doing lateral movement or escalation on privileges or whatnot, that's where they generally lack visibility and they lack security controls. So this is a kind of a nice heat map, if you will, of how you're covered across the entire kill chain for a threat actor. Everything we do is fully open with queries, and again, all this intellectual property, all these rules, once you install and have these rules in your hands, they're yours forever. So this is not a black box. This is an open environment. You can see everything that you're doing. So once we have our threat hunting rules, then we want to apply analytics to those rules, where we start adding some severity. We start figuring out how often we want to run these rules and whatnot. And these are all customizable as well. So you can see the severity across the analytics plane and the tactics across MITRE that they have. So it's a pretty easy way to organize the rules across your environment. And this is the tuning that quantum security can do for you. Once we have analytics, we have the rules. Now we're starting to create incidents. This is live data, so I'm not even sure what incidents are the team's showing right now for our internal stuff. But here's an incident on AWS. So this AWS environment has a credential abuse hijacking incident. And so as a security operator, it's really important for me to do a couple things. One is, how big is the incident? What am I worried about here? Is this a tactic that's just a discovery, or are they doing escalation or lateral movement, meaning they're very late in the kill chain? So I kind of want to see how far in the kill chain that threat actor is. And is this incident across my entire enterprise, or am I isolated to a particular workload or a user, right? So as a security practitioner, I can very easily go into this incident and see the timeline of this incident, which is in preview right now. But if it had multiple incidents that were treeing off of each other, I'd be able to see that kind of that movie, if you will, from where the incident started to kind of where it is. But I could immediately go in and investigate these things, kind of figure out my scopes, and I could start being a security analyst and cross-correlating stuff. So if I can easily look at related alerts, what are my related alerts for this incident? Looks like there's 90 of them. And I am immediately in to the query and all the log files that are associated with this, where I can get all the log information. I can start appending some of my other pieces of data that I may have. I want to maybe look at my application logs and start drilling in. And I don't want to spin the propeller too hard on this and kind of scare you or confuse you with the level of tech that's here. What I wanted to kind of share was this is the interface that a SOC analyst will manage your environment. And quantum security can do this completely on your behalf, okay, where you don't have to worry about any of the screens I just showed you, and you only see the dashboards, right? However, if you have a security team or you plan on expanding in the future, all of this is visible to you at any time, and all the information is able to be retained by you, whether with quantum security or not. So unlike a lot of other solutions that are black boxes, you don't get access to this. You don't see the level of detail. You don't see how incidents are being managed. You don't get access to queries and whatnot. And with the Sentinel architecture and quantum security kind of overlaying on your solution, you can, if you want, see everything our organization is doing. And so there's no proprietariness here. So you can see how fast, what kind of the process between threat hunting the rules, how they map to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, the analytics layer that we have across severity, and then the creating an incident. I want to just kind of stop there. And Sharon, did you have anything to add across those three?
No, just on the openness of the platform and not having that sense of hiding things or having that lock-in, I would say is really refreshing. It's not the normal way you would see most MSSPs try to work. So Quantum is really taking a very different approach here, and I think it's honestly to the benefit of the customers that you have a trusted security partner working with you who at the same time is just trying to prove that, if I'm good, you'll stay with me, right? There's no need for me to do anything else to try and retain you on my platform. So everything that you're seeing in here, yes, you can do it yourself, but depending on where you're at today, I would say really think about whether a partner is going to help accelerate your security maturity as well. Think of them as an augmented extension of your in-house security team, whether you're slowly trying to grow that up, or today maybe you're just not so used to doing a lot of these functions. I think a lot of in-house security teams in the past have been very much focused on the dreary things like managing patches, doing device management, updating, and rolling out patches wherever necessary. When we start to remove a lot of that consideration or a lot of the R&R from your plate, and now you're posed with the issue of how do I investigate a threat, which Chris is going to go into in a bit. It can be quite daunting. It can be quite overwhelming. That security context, separate from understanding a technology, product knowledge is one thing, but I think understanding threats, understanding what's the best way to identify and to triage a particular incident, that's where the expertise really becomes more pronounced. So I think with that, Chris, just please take it away on the investigation piece.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And then and just to add to that, as a reminder, and as you think about your own security stack, we do see the world changing to a cloudy world as it relates to cybersecurity. Like there was a day in the web hosting cloud world where you used to put your application with the web hosting provider, and that provider would be responsible for your operating system and your stack and whatnot. And that environment may be tuned, they would debug it or whatever. But if you wanted to move providers, all that tuning work was completely gone. You'd lose it all. You have to move your app. And it's the same thing with cybersecurity. And if you're using a traditional non-cloudy approach like Sentinel, and you're sending your log data to a classic MSSP or whatnot, where they have their own stack, they may be using QRadar, their own proprietary stack. That log data is in their environment. All the tuning work that I'm showing you with rules, and I'll show you playbooks here in the future. If you were to leave that provider, it's all gone. You start all over again. Where here, this is in your account. This isn't like quantum security doesn't own this. We just, like Sharon said, we're just trusted to help you, right? But this is your account. It's your log data. It's your rules. Once we implement the rules and we do all the tuning, if we leave for whatever reason, you decide to insource it, it stays with you, right? So kind of really building up that, the ownership of your data and the history of all this tuning work is really important versus switching vendors and kind of restarting every time. So I just encourage you to kind of think about your strategy as far as that, as thinking about the stack and owning it. You may not want to manage it because this is can get quite complicated. You can let us manage it, and just enjoy our weekly, monthly, quarterly reviews where we're kind of going over threats in your environment via various visual dashboards that may make sense. Okay, so it's kind of a strategic a shift on your environment. Okay. So let me go into automation and talk about what happens if you get a particular incident. What do you do about it, right? So here's just so we're kind of moving from SIM to SOAR. If you're kind of familiar with those two kind of platforms, where SIM is the log collection, the rules, and the identification of an incident, and SOAR is that orchestrated automated response to a particular incident. Okay, I have an incident. What do I do about it? Right. And the typical process, which you may be familiar with, I'll jump into just one here. The typical process is I get information on this incident, an alert is triggered, and I get the account information or whatever. I get relevant hosts, IPs that could be associated, and I create a ticket. Like that is the world of an MSSP, right? Is I get this information and I'm flooding you with tickets and potentially can have a lot of noise or not. And SOAR is we do that because we have to have accountability and a history trail of an incident. But what do you do about it, right? And it's really about the automation and response of that. So on this particular one, say this machine, or say we identify that there's an incident across a machine that potentially been compromised. Do we need to create a ticket and potentially wait for a response? And then that response then says, okay, please isolate that machine. As an engineer goes into the environment and disables the NIC or whatever. And that process could take, depending on the response, could take minutes to hours to days, right? Depending on that, just the way that communication works. Versus, we know we have an incident of a certain severity. We know it's a part of the kill chain, which is an uncomfortable part of the kill chain for us. And we're going to, with code, immediately isolate that machine, right? So we get the relevant data and we isolate that machine from the network, right? And then if the threat actor is on that machine, we can restrict application execution on that machine as an example. So the threat actor can't do anything. They can't open up PuTTY, they can't FTP, they can't do anything on that machine. That can be done fully automatically with code. And that's the playbooks that we start, or automation, I think it's called now. but that's the rules in which we start responding to for remediation. This is not just on a virtual machine level. We can tie into Active Directory. So if we see a user doing something like brute force, or we see a user coming in from a different geo that we know that they're not in 2 hours ago when they logged in, we could talk right into Active Directory. We could talk right into Okta, or any SSO that you may use, and disable that user, or just reset the password, right? Where if they reset the password, then the user can go in and recreate a password with their two-factor authentication, and we kind of feel better about that. So there's all sorts of scenarios, and this is where I think the power of intellectual property is for your environment, is that we would work with you and identify all of these automation steps to figure out what makes sense for your environment, whether it's integrating into your Zoom, Slack, whether it's talking to your SharePoint, your AWS environment. We can integrate and do immediate response. If you feel comfortable or uncomfortable with immediate disabling of users or disabling of machines or whatnot, okay, that's no problem. As long as we have we will create the ability to do that through code at a press of a button. So when we have a conversation or escalate a ticket and say, customer, we think that there's an issue with this machine or this network or whatever, we want to disable this user or application or whatever, and you say approved, you maybe have to go through some change management process. Just know that when you say approved, the button's pressed and it's done in seconds, right? And so that does a couple things. One is it reduces the amount of time a threat actor is on the environment, and secondly, it reduces our cost, because I don't have to pay for a security engineer for all that manual effort to kind of remediate, right? And I'm able to be more efficient on pricing if I'm as quantum security leveraging code and automation. Sharon,
Yeah, I
did you
just
have
wanted
any?
to, yeah, mention that is really non-trivial. So just think of the example of, let's say you have one IP address that you know for sure is coming from it's a C2 server, for example. You definitely want to block it out. Chances are you have multiple vendors or multiple versions of firewalls in your network. So how are you going to actually implement, go to your checkpoint, to your Fortinet, to your Palo Alto, and continually copy and paste that single IP that you want blocked? By then, I think the attacker would have already moved on to a new IP, to a new infrastructure already. And just imagine if it's not just one IP, but hundreds of IPs that you want to block and blacklist across multiple vendors. The sheer amount of manual effort that would take is really quite cumbersome. So being able to pre-build this workbook that not only helps you retrieve programmatically the number of IPs, the specific IPs that you want to block, but also help you issue out the different commands. I can speak to Checkpoint, I can speak to Fortinet, whichever, even your own custom brand if you're using something a bit more obscure and non-mainstream. As long as APIs are available, really the sky's the limit in terms of what you want to automate. So it sounds simple. We make it sound like we're just going to block an IP, isolate a machine, but it can be much more complex and nuanced than that.
Yeah, and I'll just add again, you don't have to be experts in doing this. The idea is that this is done the way we operate and the way Sentinel operates is in this manner, and all the work that gets done on your behalf is fully visible on what we're doing, and it's yours forever, right? So this is the part that are constantly tuning and improving your environment to become more resilient. And from a code perspective, how are we able to manage multiple Sentinel environments across various geos? Because some of you may have, there's one hotel franchise that we've been talking to that's got geos all over the place with its own data rules, its own IT security teams and whatnot. And so we are right now in one workspace, but how do you manage if you have multiple workspaces or multiple Sentinel installations? You may have business units that require various security views. You may want to do this on development and production environments or different geos. And so what we have put together is, if you're familiar with GitHub, it's a code repository. We deliver and manage Sentinel as code, right? And so you're able to go in and see what we can do for Sentinel deployments. And so we deploy this all via Terraform. And again, if you don't know GitHub, this may be too technical, but the idea is that us as a partner is doing this on reference architecture that's consistent across all customers and all deployments that we do on your behalf. So you don't have all these inconsistencies across your environment. And if we find a better way, since we have customers globally located, if we find a better way to execute on a particular customer, we roll that out across all of our customers. So you actually learn from our customer base and improve across our customer base. If you're curious about this, we have a video for you that you're welcome to watch, and it kind of walks through how we deploy Sentinel with code in minutes. So this isn't a large get started process where it takes months and thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, $100,000 of implementation. We don't have that. Since we deliver it as code, we actually don't have setup fees. This is available right in the Azure portal, and then right through our code, Sentinel can be stood up and running, and we start getting data connectors going to it. So it's a pretty easy process to get going. And I'll stop there. I know we have 15 minutes left. We wanted to have an opportunity for Q&A. But Sharon, was there anything else you felt like we needed to cover?
Sorry, struggling with the unmute button, clicking 20 times. But no, I think that was a great overview. Again, there's quite some stuff that we didn't actually tap on today because I think we want to take progressive steps towards it. Sentinel is a huge platform. It can be a complex solution. So things we didn't talk about today were, for example, bring your own ML. We've actually democratized that a bit more, opened up the fusion models. So we have 90 machine learning models that Microsoft maintains for you. It slowly molds and learns according to your specific tenant. Even though the fundamental basis on which these models were built on remains structurally the same. based on your data, based on your feedback loop as well, that you tell us this is a true positive for me, it's a false positive for me. We actually continually use that to reiterate and refine that model for you. In the past, that used to be closed. Now we've actually opened up those 90 models so that you can tweak it in yourself. You can say that, hey, let's exclude this subnet because it's a dev subnet for me and it's totally skewing off all the data. So those are some examples. Another thing that, yeah, Chris is actually hovering on is notebooks. This is really powerful. Jupyter Notebooks gives you the ability to utilize your Sentinel data as well as data that you might have sitting elsewhere, right? So we have this concept of data gravity, where there might be instances where, for example, you have data sitting in a database and there's no reason for you to ship that all the way in, backhaul it into your SIEM. But for enrichment purposes, you might still want to do a lookup here and there. Jupyter Notebooks is a great bridge for you to have another console, or actually it's not a different console altogether, but to have another view where you can combine all of that data. If you love Python, you love using R, you like the visualizations that ggplot or whichever gives you, you want to use scikit-learn to build your own models as well, by all means go ahead and go crazy with Jupyter Notebooks, because that is a very flexible tool that lets you utilize all of those open source tools and configure and customize your own view as well.
Yeah, you're great points. And we have about 10 minutes left. So if anyone has questions or comments, we can open the floor here and take questions. I know there's one question that's already been answered in case no one's monitoring chat is, can Sentinel work for on-prem environments? So this is truly XDR. So, you may have heard the term EDR, which is endpoint detection and response. This is truly X, which means everything. So yes, we can pull from on-prem, from VMware to traditional Windows file servers, all the way to SaaS. We're pulling in data on Zoom and Slack and so anything cloud, anything on-prem, anything software, anything SaaS, we can monitor for. And one thing I didn't mention as well is some organizations are becoming a little bit more chat ops focused on how you do business. So if your business is really thinking about it doesn't like to log into portals and kind of go that world, it lives and breathes inside Microsoft Teams or Slack or whatnot, we can integrate the alerting and the incidents and even some of the actions into your chat ops experience. So imagine getting, you're sitting there in Teams, you have your security room, Quantum Security's in that room with you or not, and Sentinel is delivering incidents into your Teams room. And then from there, it has relevant context. And if you have automation built, it has automation buttons that you can press and activate, disable user, reset things, right? So that way you don't have to have the experience of opening up a browser. It can happen right within your chat ops experience, and we think that's the future too, which is just speeds up response times, and it simplifies your life from how many kind of tools you're using.
Yeah, Chris, there was another question on the chat. How is Azure Sentinel different than the AI-based cybersec offered by Darktrace?
Sure, I could answer the first part. This year, I can jump into that one. So Darktrace is mostly built as a network tool. So they're more centric on it's more of a NIPS, if you're familiar. So it's getting all of its log data across the network. They are starting to implement a little bit across some SaaS solutions, but again, Sentinel doesn't just look at network; it looks across everything. Again, we're looking at anywhere from databases to firewalls to endpoints to SaaS solutions to application logs, where Darktrace doesn't have that exposure.
Yeah, so just to echo on that exactly, I would say Darktrace places a huge emphasis on being AI driven. And I think we might need to take that also sometimes with a pinch of salt. So even Microsoft says it, right? Take it with a pinch of salt. Mm-hmm. Audit us when we say that we give you AI, ML capabilities, because really it's going to end up being very noisy. When you do, how should I put this? We have this very common saying when we talk about AI and ML that it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not actively tuning those models, if there's not there hasn't been a lot of research being done before we implement those models, you are going to end up getting very noisy alerts or alerts that don't make sense. Because very often with AI and ML versus something like a statistics-driven rule, for example, when you're implementing your own rule, there is a logic behind it. We're saying that I believe this is going to be indicative of a brute force attack because X, Y, and Z has happened, or that I think this is a process injection that's taken place because I see this, this, and this that has happened. When we rely too much on just saying, let's do anomaly detection, let's just look at something that happens least frequently, most frequently, etc., it can be a bit prone as well to having lots more false positives. So I think a lot of feedback we get is Darktrace is good, right? Don't get me wrong. But there's going to be a lot of effort that you have to put in to actually fine tune that to make sure it works for your org. And especially if you think of your organization as a growing organism, right? You are not going to always be static. There's going to be all these changes and you're going to have to re-baseline everything again and again. So that's an ongoing process. I would say with Sentinel, the scope is a bit bigger. So Darktrace, great at network detection, great at looking at header information, pulling that out, processing that. But Sentinel, we're really focused on the bigger picture. We can ingest Darktrace. We actually have the connector in there as well. Take your Darktrace in and then look at the broader picture. How else can I corroborate information from my network to something that's happening on the endpoint, for example? Are they both beaconing to the same place? How can I then backtrace the steps as well? So think of it more from that perspective. And I guess that's the biggest difference between a tool like Sentinel and Darktrace.
Yeah.
But it's a great question. I think we often get, because the SIM is so flexible, I think there is that tendency to see it as an overlap to a lot of the security solutions that we have today. I mean, I've had customers ask, can I build my own AV out of Sentinel? Can I build my own EDR, my own DLP? Technically, nothing's stopping you, you know, because Sentinel is that flexible. You can really kind of bend it and break it such that it works to fit that specific use case. I think it's a matter of really, do you want to go down that route of re-engineering a tool that already exists out there, an EDR, a Darktrace, NDR, or do you want to use it for the broader bird's eye view capabilities?
Yeah. And I'll add, I'm going to pull this screen back up again, because I'll add, you know, when you think about protecting your data, don't think about generally the technology, but think about the minor attack coverage. Because at the end of the day, we are trying to prevent threat actors from having impact on your environment. Flat out, that's what we're all here for, right? We didn't wake up or start a company because we wanted to buy cybersecurity stuff, right? We are here to make sure that the threat actor doesn't follow this kill chain and have it, you know, deface your environment, just, you know, destroy your data, right? And kind of do this. That's at the end of the day. So when you think about Darktrace or whatever, or if Cisco or Palo or whatever, think about, you know, I encourage you to embrace the minor attack framework and think about what are the technologies that I need to have to ensure that I have proper coverage across the kill chain to not only detect, but protect. And that's why Sentinel is so broad, and we've aligned with it because they bring in all those log sources, have those native connectors with all those vendors, and we're able to get proper coverage across the entire kill chain. So, and then think about, you know, where do I have gaps in coverage? Which another solution may make sense to kind of fill those gaps, right? And so you know, I would use this as your to-do list, if you will, on you know, and you could filter this down to whether you're more of a Windows or Linux or clouds, or there's ways to filter this down. But I would think about this as this is a strategy, and whatever vendors that I have, I need to think about strategically. You'll also realize you may have a bunch of overlap, and you're spending too much money, right? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to make sure you're able to detect and protect this, but you may have vendors doing the same thing on, across the kill chain. So if you please, if you do anything today, is go to the attack.monitor.org, learn about it, YouTube it, you know, and embrace it. I think someone else is writing a question, or you can jump off mute and voice if you'd like. All right, the suspense is killing me. It's a big question.
I know, no pressure, Deepshika.
That's fine, Chris.
Hey.
Thanks for the session.
Mhm.
I think there has been just last question in the chat. How's Azure Sentinel different from AI-based cybersec offered by Darktrace?
Oh yeah, that's the one that was the one we just answered.
Yeah. So in addition to that, just wanna add in that, that when you are doing any of the Sentinel or any of the, SIEM-based solution on-prem, or you use a cloud-based one, you are not investing on the infrastructure cost for running that application, updating that, maintaining that, its internet connectivity, right? And also, making sure that its engine is updated. When you are running a cloud-based, any of the SIEM-based solution, its availability is taken care by the cloud provider. So there is a less cost on that side, right? And on the back end, since it's AI based and Microsoft is receiving millions of signals from around the globe, different customers and the different attacks that has been happening. So we are constantly updating. It's never outdated. So that's where you can have a sort of value proposition, a cloud-based solution or an on-prem solution, or with any other company provider, that how many customer base they have, how much experience they have in the same field. That's what I'd like to add.
Yeah, good
Thank
point.
you.
I'll add this, and I don't like to, I won't bring any vendors up, but I've been running a cybersecurity practice, started a company called Armor over a decade ago. And Armor protects 1,400 customers across 40 countries globally, some of the world's largest companies. And I have been through the ringer on SIEM platforms. And during that process, I'm not going to mention names, but during that process, I've had to, you're responsible for the compute, you're responsible for the infrastructure portion of it. And I've had to limit my security analysts from either the amount of time that they do queries or the amount of depth that they do queries, because the software will just fall over, or I will run out of compute and the physical hardware will fall over. And so there's nothing more frustrating than telling your analyst not to do broad queries or limit time ranges and extend their kind of view. Where with the advantage of the cloud versus the traditional way, it just scales, right? It just absolutely scales. And with cybersecurity, I don't think anything uses data and compute like cybersecurity. And the Sentinel model here has no compute really tax. You're not paying for that. You're paying for the amount of data ingested. And I could run as many queries. I could have them as deep as I want, or complicated as I want, or broad date range as I want. And I'm not paying this tax. I'm not having to worry about how many CPUs that I have behind it. And so it just kind of works. And so as a security practitioner, that's why we are on the Sentinel platform, because I didn't want my organization to have to manage that plumbing and the pain that I've had with the non-cloud platforms. Great. I think we're at time.
Yeah, we are. And
Yeah,
any last questions?
Yeah, and guys, if you want to reach out or know more, please send an email to Sharon, Chris, or I think we'll drop contacts there. You would like to dig in more or would have a personalized discussion around it, please drop in email and we'll connect back to follow through with you.
Yeah, we'll also send out the recording of this session and all the details associated with that. Thanks a lot, Sharon and Chris. Really good insights. And thanks everyone for participating. Thank you.
That's good.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.